2, 1. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is McKaylee. I'm with Tattered Cover Bookstore, and I first and foremost want to say thank you. Thank you for supporting local independent bookstores. Thank you for sticking with us throughout this pandemic that is still ongoing in our world. We would not be here as a local business without you for the last year, for the last 50 years, because believe it or not, it is Tattered Cover's 50th anniversary here in 2021, which is an amazing feat for a bookstore. And we wouldn't have been able to do it without you, our community, our local community, our virtual community, because we've grown this group into an amazing global entity. So thank you so much for joining us and supporting us. Before I continue, I want to let you know that closed captioning is enabled for those who might want it or need it. There's a black bar down at the bottom of the screen with a button labeled CC on it. If you click that button, closed captioning is enabled should you want it or need it. And for those of you joining us who may not have heard of Tattered Cover Bookstore, Tattered Cover is a local independent bookstore located in the Denver metro area in Colorado. And we currently have 4 locations, soon to be 5, which is amazing. We have our Stanley Marketplace location, which is going to be our children's only location, opening up later this summer. And one of our locations is mid-move right now, which is amazing. And that's hopefully going to be opening up late May, early June. So for our other 3 stores, you can come and visit us, smell the books, enjoy browsing. As long as you're wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose, you can come shop and browse for about 90 minutes or so. But if you want to come and shop online, you can totally do that too at tatteredcover.com. We can service all your bookish needs there. Also on tatteredcover.com is our events. Holy crap, guys, we have so many events. It's bonkers. We have so many amazing ones coming up. We have one tomorrow with Ronald White and his new book, Lincoln in Private. We have amazing other series that we're doing, like our Leaders as Readers series with local community leader Rachel Carlson, and we just announced another one with Wayne Ting, which is just an awesome series. And this one I'm very excited for, the one that we're starting here tonight. And it's Time to Travel, traveling in a post-COVID world and the resources to help you. And it's with Travel Lemming, also known as Nate Hake, and I'm very excited to introduce this series to you all to learn more about traveling, which is something a lot of us are really itching to do, from one of the best travel experts I've met. So a little bit about Nate, our guest tonight. Nate Hake is a US citizen from Denver, Colorado, a frequent digital nomad and the founder of Travel Lemming. In 2016, it started out as a year-long trip around the globe, which took him to 43 countries across 6 continents, and he hasn't really stopped since. He loves to explore emerging destinations and vibrant cities. His goal is to help end over-tourism by promoting travel to places that may not be on your tourist list, but have plenty of space for new visitors. And you can visit him online at travellemming.com. And it's my honor to welcome tonight Nathan Hake. And so we're going to change our video up here and have him join us and unmute. There we go. I'm just getting all the tech in a row.
Thank you so much, McKaylee.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm very excited as a travel nomad myself with, Army brats. As parents, we just traveled all over the place. So this is really encouraging. And I hear you have a presentation for us. So I'm going to pop out and let you take it away from here. Just want to let our audience know we will have a Q&A session after Nate's presentation here. There's a chat next to the screen you're watching us on. So make sure you type those questions in there and Nate will take them later. For now, take it away, sir.
Awesome. Thank you so much, McKaylee. And thank you so much to everybody who is here. I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation real quick with you here. So I'm Nate Hake. Today we're talking about traveling in the title was post-COVID world, but the reality is that COVID is far from over in the rest of the world, and may not be for a while. So this may be a feature of travel for some time to come. Here's a quick roadmap of what we're going to cover today. I'm a little bit loquacious. I used to be a trial lawyer. I'm going to try to keep it to about 30 minutes so that we have about 30 minutes so I can answer all your questions. Leave those in the chat while we're going, and we'll answer those at the end. First off, I'll introduce myself. This is the first of a few events that we'll be doing. So just give you a bit of background about myself and about my site, Travel Lemming. Then we'll sort of zoom out and we'll just step back, take a breath, and look at what the state of travel is today. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of misinformation. And obviously, this is the most complicated world for international travel that most of us have ever lived in. So I'm going to give you an overview of where the travel world stands today and what that means for you, a few tips on how to navigate that. Then we're going to talk through some places that I've identified that seem like they're either ready for travel or maybe ready sometime this summer. And so we'll talk both about some domestic destinations and also about some international destinations before we go ahead and wrap it up for that Q&A. Oh, and one more thing. I'm going to be going pretty quickly here. There's a lot of websites, a lot of info in here, and also a lot of books that we're going to be mentioning, which you can find at Tattered Cover. All of that is available at the website that you see at the bottom here, travellemming.com/tatteredcover. I made a special page for you. You can go there and you'll find links to everything that we discuss on here. You can also sign up for my email list, and you can fill out a quick survey so that we can help make sure that we're making events in the future that are useful for you as you're planning your travels. And so that link again, travellemming.com/tatteredcover, and I'll throw that back at you at the end of the presentation. So first up, a quick disclaimer. All information presented here is my personal opinion, does not reflect travel advice of any nature from Tattered Cover or Travel Lemming. Travel during a global health pandemic is inherently risky. Do it at your own risk. So with that, first up, who am I? Who is Nate? What is Travel Lemming? Let me go ahead and give you a brief introduction about myself. So I'm from Colorado. My family has a long history here in Colorado. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, that's my great-granddad who used to work in the coal mines up in Frederick. And I was raised in a military family as well, actually. Spent the first half of my childhood down in Colorado Springs, living at Peterson and the Air Force Academy. Went to Patrick Henry Elementary School. And then later, I also lived abroad. So I moved to Misawa Air Force Base in Japan. And I think that's really where I sort of just fell in love with travel. Like there's really nothing like being a child living abroad to really open your eyes to the world. I came back to the States, went to school out east, came back to Denver after that, spent 5 years practicing at a major corporate firm here in downtown Denver, Colorado. And then in 2016, I took what I thought would be a year off to just travel the world. I love travel. Hadn't had time at that point in my career to do as much of as I wanted. And so in 1 year, I went to 43 countries across 6 continents, just trying to soak it all in, see as much as I could. And what I found out along the way is I like it so much, I didn't want to stop. And so I didn't. In 2017, halfway through that trip, I founded Travel Lemming. What I noticed on my trip was that a lot of travelers go to the same places. Everybody wants to go to Venice and Amsterdam and to Machu Picchu. And it's creating a real problem with over-tourism around the world. And I also found that a lot of the best places that I found, like Almaty, Kazakhstan, or Tbilisi, Georgia, really were pretty far off of most people's radars. And a lot of that was because of the way that the travel marketing industry works. So I founded a travel guide site focused on highlighting emerging and up-and-coming destinations. And that is now my site, Travel Lemming, which is growing to a pretty large site. So here is a map of all the places I've been since in the last 5 years. It's been quite the adventure, as you can see. I think I missed a few stars. I'm somewhere over 70 countries or so. I stopped country counting a little while ago. Here's a few photos from my travels. You can find, I've got a photo diary on that link that I sent that you can go through and see some more, but just some really incredible experiences. These are all photos that I took. That one in Chernobyl, that doll, she still haunts me. Really just all sorts of incredible adventures. So after that first year, I founded Travel Lemming, and then I started to transition from full-time travel to sort of more life as a digital nomad, remote worker abroad. And so since that time, I've spent most of my time living and traveling in various destinations around the world. I spent quite a bit of time living in Merida, Mexico, Playa del Carmen, Mexico, Tbilisi, Georgia, Budapest, Buenos Aires, Thailand, and about a dozen other locations. Travel Lemming, as you see here, is a site. It's basically just an online travel guide. So I write guides to destinations. They're destinations that at the time we write about them are up and coming, although some of them, one of our more popular ones is Tulum, and it is just completely no longer a hidden gem, to be sure. But we write guides to really help people, to really encourage travelers to be willing to explore places you might not have thought about. Places, like I said, like Georgia, my favorite country, Armenia, the Ukraine, places that don't get quite as much attention as I think that they should. And so that's what you'll find at Travel Lemming, is just guides, lists of things to do, itineraries, stuff like that. We also, and what Travel Lemming gets its most of its attention for, is our annual list of emerging destinations. So we run a whole competition with all the world's tourism boards. Every country has a tourism board. They submit a destination that they think is sort of, doesn't get the attention it deserves. We have a whole process where the world's biggest travel bloggers and influencers vote on them, and then it gets covered. You see some of the coverage here all around the world. The goal being to try to direct travelers away from places like Amsterdam and Venice, which are just swamped with tourists, or at least were, and encourage them to go to emerging destinations. So you can find that on there as well. Well, anyway, that was my life until about a year ago. And then, as I said, I was living when the pandemic broke out. I'd spent a couple months in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And, I ended up that couple months and turning over to more than a year. I only came back to the United States a little bit earlier this year. So Argentina was one of the first countries to really lock down hard. I think they were the first country in the Western Hemisphere. And when I say hard, I really mean that they locked down hard. We had the world's longest and harshest quarantine during 2020. For the first 2.5 months that I was there, they shut down all flights out. The only way to get out was on an expensive and complicated repatriation flight. And we were required to stay in our homes. You could only go out if you were going to the grocery store or to the pharmacy. And there were police that checked. And you weren't even allowed to go for a run, go for a walk, go to the park. The parks were closed until about 3 months into it. I spent, I think, an entire month in the month of April where I literally never even went downstairs from my apartment. That's how strict they were. They were trying, to keep the virus under control. They had middling success with that. The other problem that we had there, of course, is that it was winter. It was the Southern Hemisphere. And so as a result of that, the roller coaster of the pandemic was sort of inverted from my experience. And so the first few months were really quite challenging. And so you see me there in my apartment drinking mate, which is a traditional Argentinian drink, and working on my computer. That's basically what I did for a half a year there or so before they finally sort of started to open back up. And then I, did enjoy a little bit of the Argentinian summer in Buenos Aires before coming back here recently to Denver, Colorado, home where I currently am, waiting until there's somewhere that is appealing and desirable to travel to. Hopefully in a month or so, be back out on the road. And the next time I'll be doing this event, I'll be coming to you from Malta or Serbia or wherever I end up going. So that's my story. That's who I am. But let's go ahead and get to helping you understand the state of travel today and start talking about some practical planning resources. So first up, what's going on with travel? I get this question all the time. People are really confused. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of clickbaity headlines on social media about, Italy's reopening to tourism. Well, Italy still has a lockdown. So yeah, you can go, but you really have to, I think, dig a little bit deeper than what you see on some of those social media headlines. First, let's go ahead and let's look at what the CDC says about travel. So the CDC says that people who are fully vaccinated can travel safely within the United States, but should still follow the CDC's recommendations for traveling, which includes things like wearing masks, stuff like that. They have a separate page for international travel. Again, both of those are linked on that page. And what the CDC says is that international travel poses additional risks, and even fully vaccinated travelers are at increased risks for getting and spreading new COVID variants. They recommend delaying international travel until you are fully vaccinated. And then if you read the rest of it, they're kind of a little wishy-washy about whether or not international travel is advisable at all, even if you are. Aside from whether or not it's advisable from a public health decision, obviously that's something everybody has to decide for themselves in their own circumstances. There's the question of what's even possible. So what's up here on the screen is a map of, as of yesterday, the current travel restrictions for Americans across the world. Only the green countries can you travel to as, in the same way as you would have before the pandemic. So that's very few. The red countries are currently closed to like most Americans entirely. The yellow countries you can go to maybe with a test or if you're vaccinated, depends a little bit different. This is all coming from Kayak's travel restrictions website. I think it's the best one I found. There's a lot of sites out there. Kayak.com/travel restrictions. You can hover over the individual countries and then click through and see what information they have. But as you can see right now, I mean, those yellow countries in South America and Africa, I would not advise anybody to be traveling there right now, given the state of the outbreak there. So it really is pretty limited, but it's starting to loosen up. So here's the good news. Europe is likely to be opening relatively soon for vaccinated Americans, at least in many places. In fact, some countries in Europe, such as Iceland, Croatia, and Greece, are already open to Americans who have the vaccine in most cases, or who have a PCR test in some others. Others, such as Malta, which is a place that's high on my list, are planning to open in June. The EU's Commission has recommended that member states work to create a plan to allow vaccinated travelers, to visit the EU. But it's up to the individual member states within the EU, which covers most of Europe, in order to make those decisions. You can see there in the bottom right-hand corner, I have a link to the Reopen EU site. This is an official site run by the European Union. It has really great information that you can use about the state of the outbreak in each country, about the state of restrictions, and about travel restrictions. You can click around and really do quite a lot. Again, that link is in the travellemming.com/tattered cover. One challenge is that, the United Kingdom just a couple of days ago released its so-called green list of countries that it's basically going to allow its people to travel to and will accept visitors from. And the US is still not on that list, which makes sense because our case levels are still relatively high compared to what they have in the UK. The only country on the UK's green list, as we'll talk about in a moment, that really is of any significant import is Portugal. And so their advice still is, other than Portugal, for their own citizens, it's not even just advice, like they cannot travel abroad. So that's the state of what's happening. Europe is slowly in a state of opening up. I think the latter half of the summer, quite a lot of Europe will be in a position where travel for vaccinated folks who are comfortable with it will be possible. That's the good news. Here's the bad news. The COVID epidemic is not over on a global level. And in fact, it's not even close to being over. We're still very close to record highs. If you look at the global count for cases and for deaths, we're right at the top, which is as bad as it's ever been. A lot of that is owing to what's happening in India and in some other countries. But the global pandemic still has a long way to go. The global vaccine rollout is far behind the United States. I mean, we are very privileged to live in a country that has been as aggressive as it has about rolling out vaccines, and that's just not the case hardly anywhere else. 80% of the world is still under a level 4, which means do not travel advisory from the United States State Department. So it's going to be slow. I really don't think that we're going to get back to anything like what travel was before COVID. I mean, before COVID was the golden age of international travel. You could just hop on a plane, I did it, and bounce between countries left and right, particularly if you had an American passport. I don't think we're going to get back there until at least 2023, maybe longer. Because if you look at what some of the countries in the Eastern Hemisphere, particularly in Asia and in Oceania, are saying, they're going to remain closed for a while. Australia is telling its citizens they may not open up at all to the world until the end of 2022. And that's the same in a lot of these Asian countries. They have very large populations. It's going to take a long time to vaccinate them. They've done a really good job of keeping the virus out, so they're not going to open up. So that means, particularly in the Eastern Hemisphere, travel is just not going to be the same for a couple more years. The African and South American continents are having a lot of public health issues. So it really does mean that in the short term, I think travel is going to primarily be in North America and a Europe sort of thing. And so that's what we're going to primarily focus on here in this presentation. The other thing to remember is that vaccines aren't the whole story. I mean, first off, vaccines aren't 100% effective, but even if you're comfortable with your own personal risk of getting the virus, that's not the only consideration to think about. You have to think about what would happen if your destination suddenly had a spike and they had to impose restrictions or lockdown. You have to think about what would happen if you nonetheless got the virus, and in order to get tested to come back, you get a positive test, and then you're stuck in quarantine abroad. That's something that's happening every day to lots of Americans down in Mexico, which we'll talk about later. So that's something to be aware of. And then there's ethical considerations about what it means to go travel to a place where a lot of the other locals are probably not vaccinated, including the people who may be serving you. And so these are all things to keep in mind. We are far from living in a post-COVID world when it comes to travel. And in particular, I want to highlight the cautionary tale of the Seychelles. So the Seychelles is this gorgeous island country off the tip of Madagascar, really beautiful. And it's the most vaccinated country on a population basis in the entire world. They have like, I think almost 70% of their population vaccinated. And when I was originally preparing this presentation, I was going to tell you to go there and to go to the Maldives. And then both of them in the last week have seen just a massive surge of COVID. And they're having to close down schools, they're having to close down bars, they're having to close down restaurants. And this is in the world's most vaccinated nation. So it really gives you an idea of the risk that you take when you travel anywhere abroad, even if it's a place that has a relatively high vaccination level. They're saying in the Seychelles that something like a third of the people who are testing positive have had the vaccine. Now, remember that many of these countries are not using the same vaccines that we're using here in the United States. Efficacy levels are different, but something to bear in mind. So what does all this mean for you as a traveler? Well, I think it means the first one is you really have to do your research. There used to be a time when you could just get on a plane, hope for the best, show up, and kind of, have a good experience. And honestly, that was the kind of travel that I did for a long time. I really enjoyed that spontaneity of travel. You got to be prepared these days. You have to know where you are. You have to know where the hospital is. You have to know what the emergency assistance line is in that country, because 911 doesn't work abroad. And you should know, at least have a phrase book or something that gives you a little bit of information so that you can communicate if you do find yourself in a tricky situation. I think travel guides are like a great fallback. Not only are they great to help you plan your trip, there's a lot of research about how just simply planning a trip, you get a lot of psychological benefits out of that. But they include things like, a good travel guide will tell you where the local hospital is in each town. It'll tell you phone numbers for emergency assistance line. It'll have a little bit of, common medical phrases in the back. So buy a travel guide. Tattered Cover has lots of them. We'll talk about a lot of them later. Use a site called Our World in Data, which I'll cover at the end, to monitor the outbreak abroad. It's a really great site for visualizing how different countries are responding to this. Make a plan in case you have to end up in quarantine or lockdown if you're going abroad. Only make refundable bookings, no matter where you're going. I would not make any bookings that weren't refundable, up until a week before. Most airlines are still allowing fee-free changes. Booking.com has a little tick box you can check to search for free cancellation properties. So that's definitely something I would advise doing. And then really that brings us back to a point where the reality is that the safest travel for the impending few months is going to be closer to home. And domestic travel really is going to be the focus of most of the travel industry this summer. I think summer 2020, the statistics are saying it's shaping up to be the biggest year in the history of the United States tourism industry. It really just makes the most sense to stay domestically. We'll start by talking about some domestic travel options, because I'm guessing that for many people watching this, domestic travel is probably going to be your first way of kind of inching out there. Okay, and so now the question becomes, well, where do you go? There's a lot of places in the United States. I mean, it's a really big country, but obviously one that comes to mind for a lot of travelers is Hawaii. Hawaii has done a really good job at controlling the pandemic. They have had, I think they're still at about fewer than 100 cases per day. They used to require travelers to quarantine, but now you can use a test and then you can skip the quarantine. You do have to register for their Safe Travels program. So you have to register online ahead of time before you go. But Hawaii is really shaping up to be a really good destination to go. Really beautiful if you haven't been. Several great travel guides. I think a lot of people think of Hawaii as being an expensive destination. It doesn't have to be. Jeffrey Gray's book, Hawaii Travel on a Budget, which Tattered Cover carries, could be a good resource if you want to figure out how to plan a trip there without breaking the bank. Another destination that's in the United States and that a lot of people forget about is Puerto Rico. Now, Puerto Rico still requires a PCR test of travelers within 72 hours of visiting. And they are they're currently like they're improving as a situation, but they still do have some restrictions. There's still a midnight curfew there. I would probably personally not go to Puerto Rico tomorrow, but if I were planning a trip for later in the summer, Puerto Rico would be a very good place to check out. I 10 years ago, I got stuck on a hurricane on the island of Vieques, just off of the coast of Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rico is incredible, but if you go to Puerto Rico, go to Vieques. It is just this amazing island, but what's really special about it, of all the things I've seen around the world, one of the most impressive is the Bioluminescent Bay on Vieques. And what that is that there's this like plankton that's natural in the ocean that glows when it's disturbed. And you can find bio bays in many different locations around the world. There's some on the main island of Puerto Rico. There's some in Asia. I've seen some in South America, but none have anywhere near the concentration of this particular plankton as this bay in Vieques. And so you go out in a kayak in the middle of the night and like your paddle, it's like Avatar. You touch the water and it glows up around your paddle. You get in the water and you're just glowing. You see fish and they just have this like blue aura around them. Absolutely incredible. One of the best travel experiences I've had in my entire life. And I've traveled more than, almost anyone I know. So definitely something to check out. Another great option is going on a road trip. So, the national park system is going to be pretty busy this summer, to be honest with you, just because of it's the obvious thing to do, right? Everybody wants to get out after having been locked up inside, etc. So if you're planning to do a road trip, particularly if you're planning to go to a lot of the national parks that we have here in the West, start planning ahead now. Start getting your campsite, start reserving your vehicles. The United States is currently undergoing a rental car crisis, basically. All the rental car companies last year during the pandemic, they sold off a lot of inventory to try to make it through. Now there's not enough rental cars out there. If you're going to need to rent a car, if you don't have one, reserve now, because I've seen some crazy prices out there. If you want to get a RV or like a camper van, there's a really cool rental site called Outdoorsy. It kind of functions like Airbnb. You find somebody who has a rental van. There's a lot of them. They have a lot of inventory in the Denver area. And you can rent their motorhome for a week and then take that on your trip so that, if you don't have one, it can be cheaper than renting from the main motorhome rental companies. Lots of great road trips to do. Tattered Cover carries a great book by Moon called The Open Road, 50 Best Road Trips in the USA. This is a highly rated book. I think they have copies over in the Colfax store, but you can definitely get it online. Again, there's a link at the end of this here. And then, of course, I have to mention it, which is that, there's a lot to see here in Colorado. Even if you're somebody who's lived here your whole life, I'm always discovering new places in Colorado. And I find that guidebooks can be a really great way to do that, because one problem of living kind of in the Denver bubble is that everybody goes on the same hikes. Everybody has their favorite, 14ers that they climb. Everybody has their favorite mountain towns that they go to. And then you kind of get this echo chamber effect of recommendations. Reading a comprehensive guidebook that covers the whole state can really be a great way to break through that. Again, I think that Moon guidebook is really good. It's got quite a bit of, it focuses on a lot of nature stuff, but Tattered Cover also carries guidebooks by Photos, by Lonely Planet, quite a few other local guides. So be sure to check that out. All right, so that's a brief summary of domestic travel. Let's say you really do want to go abroad. Well, I'm going to give you a few ideas for places, again, that you'd have to travel at your own risk, but that seem like they're on a track to be able to accept tourists. So the first one, there's only one country in the world right now that I would feel comfortable recommending to my grandmother to go visit, and that is Iceland. Iceland is currently open to vaccinated travelers. You don't need a test. If you're fully vaxxed, you can go, no problem. They have done an incredible job of managing the pandemic. They average about 5 cases per day in the entire country. And they have really good vaccination rates as well. It's also just a beautiful country that's naturally socially distant. You spend a lot of time outside. And there's cheap direct flights from Denver. Iceland Air runs a direct from Denver to Reykjavik. As you can see there, I priced it out at about $552 for a bunch of flights in June. I just got that yesterday. So that's a really good price. Those are, I think, direct flights. There's a huge benefit to that, because one problem, if you have to connect in the third country, you suddenly own that third country. If they have a spike and there's travel restrictions, and either the US or your destination country, prevent that third country, close down travel with that third country, that's going to affect you. So getting a direct flight, really beneficial. You can go to Iceland direct from Denver. Like I said, this is the only place. If my grandma was asking me about where she should go tomorrow, I would say go to Iceland, nowhere else. Now, a lot of people, of course, are interested in Europe. As I said earlier, I was hoping that we would have a little bit more guidance from the EU before this presentation, but we didn't quite get it. Now, with that said, I think that Southeastern Europe seems to be coming along a little bit faster than the rest of the continent, which makes sense. It's warmer. Croatia, Serbia, and Greece are already open to vaccinated Americans, although you have to be a little careful. Croatia they're still dealing a little bit with the health crisis there. Greece, only last week, they opened in April to vaccinated Americans, but the beaches were closed until last week, which I knew some people went and were like, the beaches are closed. And it's like, right. You have to check. You got to really check into what the situation is like and whether or not you're comfortable with that. I think Greece and Croatia they're very tourism dependent countries. So they open because they have to from an economic perspective, not necessarily because of how the situation is there. Serbia, on the other hand, I really love Serbia. I think it's a very underrated country. Because they're using the Russian and the Chinese vaccine, they have very high vaccination rates. And they're already open. You can go there. Belgrade is beautiful, Novi Sad, lots of awesome stuff to see. Hungary is one that I have my eye on. They're not open yet to vaccinated Americans. I expect that they will be relatively soon, however. I've lived in Budapest several times. It's like a second home to me. I think it is the greatest of the European capital cities. Absolutely beautiful, much more. It's like a Western European city on an Eastern European budget, basically. And also they have vaccination rates that are very high. So when they do open, if you're looking for that traditional European sort of beautiful architecture style vacation, check out Budapest. I think that's a place that definitely has a lot of possibility there. A little closer to home in the Caribbean, Aruba is open to Americans. You can fly there. You have to have a test. They do provide them on landing, I believe. And you can get there on Spirit Airlines, not the greatest airline in the world. Sorry, Spirit, if you're watching this, but affordable via a connection from Denver. I priced out flights at just under $400 with a connection in Fort Lauderdale. So that's an option as well. The last one that I really have my eye on that is not yet open to Americans, but hopefully will be soon, is Portugal. Portugal has done a very good job at managing the crisis. They have very low COVID rates, very high vaccination rates. It's a great country. As I said, it's the only country that the United Kingdom is currently opening up to right now. They have a list of 12 countries, but a bunch of them are islands in the South Pacific, and or countries like Australia and New Zealand that won't let you in anyway. The only meaningful entry on the UK's green list is Portugal. What this means is that Portugal is currently seeing a flood of bookings. So while I do think it's going to be a hot destination this summer, it means it's going to be a little bit more expensive. Round trip flights from Denver for later in the summer are currently averaging about $1,300. If you do go to Portugal, I think you'll love it. You got to have the budget for it. And also you're going to have to wait for them to open up. They do have this interesting remote worker program that you can apply to. It's something I've looked at myself. If you're working remotely and you want to try out the digital nomad life, you can get a visa. You can go for up to a year and leave and come back and stuff. So that is possible. But if that doesn't apply to you, normal tourists, still waiting for them to open up. So that's the list of places. It's a pretty small list that I personally feel comfortable, talking about right now. A lot of you are probably sitting there thinking, Nate, but you're missing the big green one on that map earlier. What about Mexico? Mexico is 100% open. You can go to Mexico. They've been open for a year. And, the Mexican government has taken an approach to the pandemic that, it's kind of cover your eyes and something doesn't exist type of approach. And a lot of people have been traveling to Mexico. You probably have a lot of friends who've gone down there. I have a ton of friends down there right now. I've lived in Mexico. I've been to Mexico about 20 times. It is, if you go to Travel Lemming, you'll see about a third of our articles are about Mexico. This is the photo you see here is of the city of Valladolid, which I am absolutely in love with and I think is incredible. I still talk to their mayor on a regular basis about the situation there. And here's my thoughts on Mexico. It's really complicated, but I think I view travel to Mexico the same way that I view riding in a car without a seatbelt, which is that you're probably going to be fine. But if you're not, you might really not be fine. And here's why. Mexico is, and why I'm personally wary. Mexico is, if you look at their case count, they actually have a really low case count, but that's because they're doing almost no tests. Their positivity rate, which is the WHO says the country should have a positivity rate below 10% in order to have a handle on how much COVID there is in the country. Their positivity rate right now is about 20%, which is the same as India. And I think we all know what's happening in India. They also have extremely low vaccination rates, again, the same as India. And their protocol enforcement is hit or miss. I was just talking to a friend yesterday who says that some of the clubs in Mexico are packed with hundreds of sweaty people without masks indoors. And so that's happening. And it just sounds like it sounds very similar to what I was hearing from a lot of my friends in India about a month ago. And so that's why I'm personally still cautious about it. I wouldn't advise any of my family to go there. I would probably be in Mexico right now if I felt comfortable with it. With that said, lots of people like to go. Mexico is a wonderful country. So many amazing things to do. That's a photo of me there in the famous Suntun cenote near Valladolid. Lots of people have fun. If you're vaccinated, it's within your sort of risk tolerance and you're comfortable with sort of the ethical considerations we talked about earlier. Lots of Mexico guides out there, tons of direct flights all over Mexico from Denver. Definitely the simplest sort of path of least resistance, just not a place that I personally would feel comfortable going just yet. Want to see them, get that testing up a little bit, get that positivity rate down. But again, this is very much a personal decision. So that's kind of my thought on Mexico. To put this in perspective, before we wrap up here, I want to show you that Our World in Data site, which I'm linked to on that, the very top of that list of resources. Our World in Data has this awesome COVID data explorer. So I have this pulled up here. This is a chart of the vaccination rate per 100 people. This is vaccine doses, so you have to cut it in half for the 2-dose vaccine. But it gives you a good perspective of kind of how the vaccination is going in the countries that we've talked about, as in comparison to the United States, which you see up at the top, and I put India at the bottom kind of as the baseline. As you can see, Mexico is down there by India, but a lot of the countries we talked about, Aruba is doing great, Hungary is doing awesome, Iceland has really kicked up its game lately. And the only one that I have a little bit of concern about is Croatia, but they seem to be picking up as well. This is an awesome site. You can explore so much different data. You can really play around with it very easily. I've highlighted here in the boxes 2 ways that you can change that chart. So if you click on that link I send, it's going to send you straight to this chart that we have on the screen with the countries we talked about. But you can add countries, make your own dashboard, whatever places you're looking to travel to. You can also look at other statistics besides total vaccinated. You can look at the positivity rate. You can look at total numbers of cases, stuff like that. Really great resource for just visualizing what's happening, keeping track of, and kind of putting it in perspective, on a relative terms. So Our World in Data, great site. Again, that and all of the resources that I've talked about in this presentation can be found at travellemming.com/tatteredcover. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, and hopefully we've got a few questions here.
This is awesome. I've made notes this whole time, and I'm very excited for my own personal travel dreams. And like you said, there's a psychological part to it that really lifts your spirits when you're thinking about future travel. So I know I'm not alone in that. So thank you so much.
There's a lot of research that says that the best benefit of a trip is actually the planning stage, which is a good reason to buy books, because it's just the psychological, you get potentially months worth of psychological benefit out of it.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. It makes a ton of sense to me, but I didn't know that there were studies on it. So I want to encourage our viewers that if you have any questions about what Nate went over or travel in general, he's got a wealth of knowledge here. So feel free to type those questions out in the chat. And one of them that starts out with that you didn't really cover in this one, but what is your average budget that you plan when you're traveling? And I'm sure depends on different countries, but maybe you could hint at some of the ones that you recommended to us. What might be your average travel budget?
Sure. My general rule of thumb is $100 a day. That's my personal rule of thumb. You can travel if you're a budget backpacker for under 50. And there are some countries where you can travel for under 20, particularly in Asia. But for me, I usually think about 100 or so. So I travel full time, so I think of about 3,000 a month. For a lot of the countries that we talked about, Iceland is going to be expensive. The flight there won't be so bad. But once you get there, getting a rental car, getting accommodation, you're going to need a little bit of a budget. Again, it's definitely the best option. So you have the money, go to Iceland. Portugal, very affordable. Normally, I don't know what all these Brits booking is going to do to prices. I think it's probably going to drive it up. Croatia, very affordable. Greece, as long as you're not on like Mykonos or Santorini, even then, if you're not staying in like the main tourist areas, you can find some pretty affordable accommodation in that 50 to 100 range. But I think that the biggest myth about travel is that it has to be expensive. And that is a myth that is frankly perpetrated by the tourism industry because they have a vested interest in encouraging people to spend more money abroad. But the reality is that, if you're from the United States, you're from one of the most expensive and most wealthy countries in the world. The countries that you're visiting, for the most part, like the locals live, they manage to survive. It's just that, you have to kind of know where to look. And so one way to do that, look outside of the main areas. Like I like to go to like what I call like shoulder neighborhoods. So instead of staying in the main center where everybody else is, a 15-minute walk might honestly cut your accommodation costs by half or more. And so that's, I think it really does kind of depend on your mentality. I know back when I was working as a lawyer, I would go on vacation and I had no time to plan anything. And I would just throw money at the problem. And that's what, a lot of travel operators want you to do. But if you're really trying to stretch a budget, which I've done on other times, you can do that. And, for folks who are younger and willing to go and stay in hostels, you can really save some money. So I know it depends isn't the best answer, but that's, I think for me, usually, between 50 and 150, averaging out to about 100 is pretty normal.
No, and that's, I think, a really great thing to know too. And knowing that like travel doesn't have to be expensive. I had a friend who used to compare it to weddings and how like the wedding industry has a really big invested interest, but it's your wedding. You can make it what you want. It's your trip. You can make it what you want. And it's flexible in that way.
100%. And definitely in place, we're doing a lot of research, knowing what things should cost ahead of time helps you a lot so that you're not.
Absolutely. For travelers with just a US passport and traveling to the EU area, where is a good place to go when needing to leave it's a German word, the Schengen?
The Schengen area.
Schengen area. Thank you.
Yeah. So for those who are watching and don't know it, Europe is a complicated political thing. You've got the EU, you've got the Eurozone, you've got the Schengen area. Schengen is what really matters for travelers. And it's more or less like the EU, but there's a few, Switzerland, there's a few different countries that kind of, the Venn diagram's a little off. But basically what matters and where I think the question is coming from is that all of the countries in the Schengen area, so that includes Portugal, Spain, Greece, Italy, Germany, you get 90 days out of every 180 days in all of those countries. And this is something I've dealt with. So like when I'm living in Budapest, if you're out there on a tourist visa and you spend 90 days in Budapest, you can't go to Germany, even if you've never been to Germany before. And because of the way that those rules work and the way that they assess it, and I've literally sat there with EU border agents, like counting the days on my stamps because it gets so complicated, it's not like a straight 90 days. So you can't just leave the Schengen area and it resets. It's 90 out of the prior 180. So you take today and you look back 180 days and you say, have I been in the Schengen area for however many days? And that tells you how many you have to go. So it's this rolling basis. So one way to kind of that hopefully helps the questioner out there is, there are places that are not in Schengen. In particular, you can go to quite a bit of Eastern Europe is outside of the Schengen area. The UK is, I think, is now outside of it. And so you can reset that time by spending some of your time in Eastern Europe. It's why I end up spending a lot of time in Eastern Europe, to be honest, is just from those sort of visa rules. So if you wanted to go to Europe for a really long trip, you could do that. You could also look, and if you're there for that long, and if you're working remotely, a lot of European countries, Estonia and Portugal in particular, have programs that can allow you, if you have a source of income from outside of the country, to get a longer stay visa. So something to look into.
Thank you for educating me on that whole area, because I feel very ignorant now and didn't know, but now I'm fascinated to go learn more about it. So I want to reassure one viewer asked if this is being recorded, and it is. So just so you know, the same link that you used to access the event tonight will be a link that you can share. It will be public on our YouTube channel, and you can share and with your friends. This has been an amazing presentation, and I highly recommend sharing it. And also for anybody who registered tonight, we will be getting a list of the books that Nate recommended, and we'll be emailing that out to you. So no worries there. Another question here is, if you could vacation this summer in only one place in the US, where would you go and what would you do?
Oh, that is a great question. You know, I want to say American Samoa, to be honest with you. Like, one of the few places I haven't been, it seems absolutely incredible. It's one of the US territories. And it's kind of a little difficult to get to, but boy, the South Pacific is just an area that I haven't spent as much time in because it tends to be a little bit more expensive. And people don't realize that we have American Samoa, we have Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands. We have agreements with quite a few of those countries that kind of function like extended territories. So there's quite a bit there in the South Pacific to check out. So I that's what I would go with. If that's considered cheating, if people are looking for one place to go, I would say, if you haven't been to New York City this summer is going to be special. Like, all of the people who were in New York went away, they're all coming back. It's really going to be a great summer to be in New York. So that's, if you can afford it, I would check that out.
Oh, I'm already planning my trip when Broadway opens up, and I'll just go see all the shows.
Yeah. Although that's not until September.
Yeah. But the summer, though, that's the thing about New York in the summer is a special kind of thing. And I love the idea of people like coming back and it being rejuvenated. That's a really great point as well. So obviously you've traveled internationally, but what is your road tripping experience, and do you ever prefer it to planes?
Yeah, I mean, so when I was a kid, I'm the oldest of 9 children, so my parents could not afford flights for the family. So I grew up on road trips. So I've road tripped pretty much the entire continental, the lower 48 states. And I've done that quite a bit, and I'll probably do a bit more this summer going around some of the parks out here. I love road tripping. I think from Denver, a really great road trip that's relatively accessible is go down to the Four Corners area, go down to Durango, check out Mesa Verde. You can keep going to the Grand Canyon if you want to. You can go up to Vegas. You can go to Zion National Park. I mean, there's just so much incredible stuff out there, and that can be done in a week or even less. And in terms of whether I prefer it to being on a plane, the pluses and minuses to both. I think having a road trip, you can take more with you. You have a lot more flexibility. Like some places abroad, I loved road tripping in Tasmania and Australia. Like, there's some destinations where you just kind of need your own set of wheels. So it really depends upon where you are. One of my big bucket list items is to overland Africa, to basically get a vehicle in Johannesburg and to go all the way up to Cairo. And that's a real adventure, but that's probably a 6-month-long road trip. So I'm going to do it at some point.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, I bet you have a killer bucket list. Maybe that's one of our other sessions that we'll do down the road, is like Nate's bucket list, or things you've checked off your bucket list that you should put on yours.
Yeah, there you go.
But so I want to end on this. Four Corners is an excellent recommendation. Thank you. Yeah. He said so. Perfect. I hate to end, but like we said before, we're hoping to do more of these travel sessions, talking about what benefits guidebooks can give you as travel slowly starts to open up. It's something that we're really looking into here at Tattered Cover with Nate and Travel Lemming at the helm here. But I want to ask this question of what has travel in general taught you, and why do you think it is vital to the human experience?
Yeah, well, it's taught me a lot. Actually, funny you ask, because one of the links on that link that I have is my list of 43 lessons I learned going to 43 countries in 1 year.
Yes.
And I think I think one of the things you learn is that people are more alike than they are different, and that a lot of the differences that we have in this world are social constructs. And you realize that. Particularly once you sort of break down language barriers and you start engaging with people who don't work directly in the tourism industry, just how much the world is how much of the walls that separate us are things that we put up ourselves. And so I think it can be really eye-opening. As I said, I think living in Japan for me as a child was a formative experience. If anyone out there has kids, once they have the vaccine and once it's safe, like travel can be an incredible experience, even for younger folks. And so it really is it is definitely something that you learn a lot about the world. You also learn a lot about yourself, I think, while you're out on the road. So, but check out my full list. I've got 43 on
That's
there.
awesome, though. I love that. What a great connection to the plug there. I love it. As someone else who has traveled, I'm very excited. I was honored to be your host in this presentation because it reinvigorated my love of it. It's something that I think other people are so excited for. So thank you, Nate, for this amazing presentation, for getting us going, for giving us these resources to start planning and looking to the future of what we can eventually do. I want to give you a chance to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and anything else you want to say that you might have missed before we end our live stream tonight.
Sure. Yeah. So, again, my site is called Travel Lemming. And lemming is an animal. The reason I named it that way, if there's I have an article on it on the site, but it's this whole Disney documentary where they murdered a bunch of lemmings, and it created this myth that lemmings will literally follow each other to such an extent that a herd will go over a cliff to their death because the lemming in front of them is doing it. They don't actually do that. It's a really weird story. Look it up. But the saying is out there, and kind of it's a tongue-in-cheek joke at the fact that tourists all go to the same places like Lemming. And so that's what that is. You can, on travellemming.com/tatteredcover, you'll find a survey that I have there, just a quick Google form. I'd love to hear from folks out there about what do you want to know? This is what I do as a profession. I do this all day. I talk to all kinds of different travelers. I know there's many different folks out there. I'd love to know a bit more about the audience, what your pain points are, what information would be helpful for you. So fill that out. Tell me. You can also email me at nate@travellemming.com. Would love to hear your feedback so that we can prepare in the next event and the subsequent events after that, useful information for you. I think we're in it for the long haul on this. Travel is not going to be the same, like I said, until at least 2023. And so, this isn't going to be, it's going to be a little more complicated than it was before. Hopefully this series can help act as a resource for you and for whoever else is in the Tattered Cover family as we go through this together.
Well, and we thank you, Nate. This has been incredible. We're excited to continue. And he's dead serious, guys, about that link. You fill it out. We can give you what you want. We can tailor this series to the audience that we have here. And we're looking forward to it, for lack of a better phrase there. But I'm McKaylee with Tattered Cover Bookstore, and I'm here with Nathan Hake of Travel Lemming. And we're so excited to present this to you today. Please share it with your friends. And that way we can continue to support local communities as we venture out and as our world opens up. It's a way to support local while you're thinking about traveling abroad. So thank you all so much again. Nate, if you'll stick around here while I just close this out.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Stay safe, everybody, and happy reading. Good night.